The moment Schiff leaned forward, the room changed. Not because he raised his voice, not because he made some dramatic accusation, but because he did something far more devastating. He asked a question that any attorney general should have been able to answer in seconds. A simple request, a yes or no decision. And suddenly the silence that followed became louder than anything Bondi said all day. That silence didn't just hang in the air. It told a story. And once you hear the full version of that story, once you understand how each unanswered question lines up with the next, it becomes impossible to ignore what Schiff uncovered.
$1 bribe, and he refused to answer. He said he didn't answer the question whether he took the money, so I'm asking you the question. Did he take the money?
Senator Schiff, I answered that question multiple times. And frankly,
Well, I don't think, with respect, I don't think you did. But in case I just didn't hear you, what is the answer? Did he take the money?
Senator Schiff, that happened prior to my confirmation as Attorney General.
Do you know,
I said that.
Do you know, sitting here, whether he took the money?
All I know is that Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche and FBI Director Patel said there was no case. And Caroline Leavitt is one of the most trustworthy human beings I know.
So
and,
was she? Was she
if
right?
you worked for me, you would have been fired because you were censured by Congress for lying with your
we can stipulate to. You can stipulate to all your personal attacks on the Democratic members of the committee.
Personal attacks. You've been attacking my FBI director. You've been attacking my office. You've been attacking.
But what we're interested in.
Borders are.
What we're interested in is the answer to these oversight questions.
You were asked
by my colleague. You were asked by my colleague.
Attacking good people.
Regular order, Madam Chair, so I can ask a question. You were asked by my colleague from Vermont whether you will support providing a video or audio tape, if it exists, of Mr. Holman taking $50,000 in bribe money from the FBI. Will you support a request by this committee to provide that tape or tapes to the committee? Yes or no?
Senator Schiff, you can talk to Director Patel about that.
Well, I'm talking to you about it. You're the Attorney General. This will be your decision. Will you support?
You don't have to tell me what is my decision and what is not my decision. I said you can talk to Director Patel.
You don't have to try to.
You think you've got a gotcha with Tom Homan, our borders czar,
excuse me,
who's been out there fighting for our country since Donald Trump took office.
I'm trying to ask a question. Regular order, please. And you don't have to defer to the FBI director to pass the buck. So I'm asking you, will you support a request so that the committee, or indeed I believe the American people, should be able to see that video or audio tape? Will you support that request?
Will you apologize to Donald Trump for trying to impeach him?
I guess the answer is you won't support that request.
After you now know that Joe Biden tried to cover up Hunter Biden's involvement with Ukraine.
Let me do this, because I think it's valuable that the American people get a sense of what you've refused to answer today. So these are just some of the questions you refused to answer, or have answered with personal attacks on members of this committee. You were asked whether you consulted with career ethics lawyers, as you promised you would do during your nomination hearing, when you approved the president receiving a $400 million gift from the Qataris. You refused to answer that question. You were asked who or what role you may have played, or who played the role in asking that Trump's name be flagged in any of the Epstein documents gathered by the FBI. You refused to answer that question. You were asked whether Holman kept the $50,000 bribe money. You refused to answer that question. You were asked whether Holman paid taxes on the $50,000 bribe money. You refused to answer that question. You were asked, did career prosecutors find insufficient evidence to charge James Comey? You refused to answer that question. You were asked, how are military strikes on these boats in the Caribbean legal? And you refused to even answer that question.
You were asked, a law degree,
excuse me. You were asked, did you discuss indicting James Comey with the president? You refused to answer that question. You were asked, did you approve the firing of antitrust lawyers who disagreed with the Hewlett-Packard merger? You refused to answer that question. You were asked whether you support a restoration fund for violent insurrections to attack the Capitol on January 6th. You refused to answer that question. You were asked whether you were firing career professionals, career prosecutors, just because they worked on January 6th investigations. You refused to answer that question. You were asked by my California colleague whether you believe government officials, like immigration officials, have to abide by court orders. You wouldn't even answer that question. This is supposed to be an oversight hearing.
Oversight?
Excuse me, you can attack me after my time is over.
You've attacked all of us, including President Trump, for your entire career.
You can attack me later, and I know you've got plenty of canned attacks. We've heard them all day to day.
Canned attacks on you?
This is supposed to be...
No one needs a canned attack on you.
Regular order, Madam Chair. I'm trying to speak. This is supposed to be an oversight hearing of the Justice Department. And it comes in the wake of an indictment called for by the President of one of his enemies. This is supposed to be an oversight hearing, and it comes in the wake of revelations that a top administration official took $50,000 in a bag, and this department made that investigation go away. This is supposed to be an oversight hearing when dozens of prosecutors have been fired simply because they worked on cases investigating the former president. This is, and now the current president.
What about the fires in California?
And
Do you
this
care
is
about that,
supposed to
Senator
be,
Schiff?
this is supposed to be an oversight hearing in which members of Congress can get serious answers to serious questions about the
Are the riots in LA serious?
About the cover-up of corruption, about the prosecution of the president's enemies. And
I think you owe the president an apology.
When will it be
your entire career,
that the members of this committee on a bipartisan basis demand answers to those questions and refuse to accept
Clearly you're
personal,
a failed lawyer
refuse
because
to
you
accept,
don't understand when
excuse
someone
me,
can and cannot
refuse
answer
to
a
accept
question.
personal slander as an answer to those questions.
Personal slander?
With
Will
that,
you apologize
Madam Chair,
to Donald
I yield
Trump
back.
for slandering him? Personal slander.
Senator Brown.
May I ask unanimous consent, Madam Chair, to introduce into the record the statement of 1,000 former Justice Department officials who warned that the Comey indictment is a democracy-threatening abuse of power. May I also request unanimous consent for the introduction to the record of 282 former career officials at the Justice Department raising the alarm who were voluntarily or involuntarily forced to leave the department because of improper actions taken by the Department of Justice. May I introduce, with unanimous consent, the Justice Department manual that talks about when initiating and declining charges are subject to impermissible considerations. And finally, Madam Chair, may I introduce the letter for Michael Ben-Ari, a career counterterrorism prosecutor, DOJ, a letter he nailed to his door, which concludes by urging officials to do the right thing for the right reasons, to follow the facts and the law, and raises the alarm that the decision to remove experienced career officials from U.S. attorneys' offices, the FBI, and critical parts of DOJ undermines our country's abilities to counter terrorist organizations, malign nation-state actors, and countless others that seek to harm our nation and its citizens. And he believes that the priority is prosecuting the president's enemies.
Are you still arguing, or are you admitting?
A pattern so concerning it shook the entire hearing from the inside out that IT started when Schiff pressed Bondi about whether she would support releasing an alleged recording tied to a $50,000 bribe. It was the kind of question that deserves a clear answer. Either the tape exists or it doesn't. Either the public should see it or they shouldn't. Instead, she dodged. She redirected. She handed the responsibility off to someone else, someone not even in charge of making that call. And from that moment, everyone watching understood something wasn't right. Because when a law enforcement leader hesitates about exposing evidence of corruption, even hypothetically, the hesitation itself becomes the evidence. But that wasn't the whole story. Schiff kept going. And with each question, the tension twisted tighter. He wasn't grandstanding. He wasn't shouting. He was reading from the record, questions that should have had straightforward answers. Questions about ethics consultations he had been promised. Questions about how a massive foreign gift to the administration was approved without transparency. Questions about why certain names were flagged in sensitive case files. Questions about decisions inside the department that affected investigations nationwide. And every time, Bondi refused. Not with legal explanations. Not with procedural clarifications. But with personal attacks, misdirection, or silence. That pattern didn't just repeat. It multiplied, revealing something deeper lurking beneath the surface. But even this wasn't the breaking point. When Schiff brought up the Epstein records, the room felt like it stopped breathing. He asked who ordered that a particular name be flagged in the FBI documents. Reports claimed there had been confusion inside the department about who initiated that instruction. Analysts online have speculated that pressure from certain officials may have influenced the review process, though none of this has been proven. Still, the question was legitimate, and the public deserved clarity. But Bondi didn't give any. She avoided it again, repeating the same dance she had done all morning. And that's when the pattern snapped into view. Because each time she refused to answer, Schiff was building a case. Not about individual scandals, but about the hollowing out of oversight itself. And he wasn't done yet. The moment he reached the $50,000 bribe mystery, the atmosphere turned electric. Schiff asked whether Holman kept the money, whether he paid taxes on it, whether the investigation had truly been closed or simply buried. Rumors circulating online have suggested inconsistencies in the case timeline, though none of these claims are officially verified. Still, they're the kind of questions any attorney general should want cleared up immediately, simply to maintain trust in the department. But Bondi refused to answer those too. She swerved. She deflected. She attacked Schiff personally. And with each refusal, the shadow over the case grew darker. Because if you run the Justice Department and you can't, or won't, answer whether an official pocketed bribe money, what does that imply about the rest of the institution? But there was an even bigger crack in the foundation waiting ahead. Schiff shifted to the firing of dozens of career prosecutors. Not political appointees, not controversial figures. Career professionals, people whose entire identities revolve around staying outside of politics. Reports claim many of them either resigned voluntarily due to internal pressure or were removed without clear explanation. Former officials wrote letters warning that the pattern was unprecedented and dangerous. Speculation online suggests some were pushed out after handling sensitive investigations. Schiff brought their concerns into the hearing, reading their warnings aloud. And Bondi had no answers. Not about why they were removed, not about who made the decisions, not about what this meant for national security. That silence was chilling because it meant something far more troubling might be happening behind closed doors. But Schiff still wasn't finished. Next came the legality of certain military strikes. These weren't minor operations. They involved life-or-death decisions, deadly force, and international law. Analysts had been debating for months whether the strikes were justified. Schiff asked Bondi directly, under what authority were those actions taken? What legal basis was used? Why weren't the details shared with Congress? Yet again, she refused to explain, offering nothing but evasion and irritation. And in that moment, Schiff wasn't just exposing a scandal. He was exposing a collapse of transparency, one that could ripple far beyond a single case or a single department. But it was his final message, not his questions, that cut the deepest. Because Schiff wasn't speaking only to Bondi at that point. He was speaking to the country. He laid out the entire list of unanswered questions like a prosecutor presenting evidence. Ethics decisions unexplained. Foreign influence reviews unchecked. Sensitive documents handled with secrecy. A bribe case with unresolved details. Firing patterns that defied logic. The legality of military strikes hidden. Court orders unacknowledged. Basic principles ignored. He didn't need to editorialize. He simply recited what she refused to answer. And by doing that, he painted a picture far more alarming than any accusation could. It became clear that the danger wasn't tied to a single scandal. The danger was that the Justice Department, the institution designed to enforce the law, might now be operating above it or outside it. But even that wasn't the final revelation. Schiff explained that oversight only works when the people being questioned participate. It fails the moment leaders decide they are not obligated to respond. That's when checks and balances dissolve. That's when accountability erodes. That's when power becomes unrestrained. He warned that if Congress allows silence to replace answers, then the entire constitutional design collapses. Not in one catastrophic moment, but in slow, deliberate refusals like the ones Bondi had demonstrated again and again throughout the hearing. And his warning wasn't abstract. It was rooted in every single unanswered question he had just listed. But the implications stretched much further, because these hearings weren't just about scandals. They were about whether institutions still functioned, whether investigations still mattered, whether ethics rules still applied, whether the public still had a right to know what their government was doing. Schiff reminded viewers that transparency isn't optional. Oversight isn't optional. The rule of law isn't optional. When an attorney general refuses to answer fundamental questions about her own department, it signals something is breaking inside the system, a break that, left unchecked, could become permanent. That's why Schiff's approach was so powerful. He didn't argue. He didn't insult. He simply exposed the emptiness behind the evasions. But the final impact goes beyond the hearing room. What happened that day was a reminder to every viewer, every voter, every citizen who cares about honesty in government. Silence is not neutrality. Silence is a message. When the people entrusted with power refuse to explain how they're using it, that's when the public must pay attention. That's when journalists must investigate. That's when Congress must push harder. Because corruption thrives in darkness, and oversight dies when leaders believe they're entitled to secrecy. Schiff understood that, and by walking through each unanswered question, he forced everyone in the room, and everyone watching, to confront the uncomfortable truth that something fundamental was slipping away. But there's one more thing. The power of that moment didn't come from theatrics. It came from clarity. It came from the realization that oversight is only as strong as the willingness of officials to cooperate with it. And if they stop cooperating, democracy itself begins to erode. Schiff wasn't just making a political point. He was issuing a warning to the country. A warning about what happens when institutions stop protecting the public and start protecting themselves. A warning about what happens when accountability becomes optional. A warning that the consequences of unchecked power don't appear instantly. They build slowly, through patterns, through refusals, through silence. That's why the hearing resonated far beyond Washington. It wasn't a spectacle. It was a wake-up call. So if you're watching this and you care about transparency, if you care about a government that answers to the people, then moments like this matter. They matter because they reveal how fragile oversight can be, how easily accountability can slip away, and how vital it is for the public to demand answers, especially when leaders won't give them. Staying informed isn't just a habit. It's a defense. It's the only way to ensure these institutions serve the people they were built to protect. If you value this kind of breakdown, if you want to stay ahead of stories most people never hear the full truth about, make sure you subscribe, drop a like, and turn on notifications. Your attention keeps these conversations alive. And trust me, there's much more to uncover.